My son was fighting for his life after emergency surgery when my brother texted, "Drive my son to his championship tomorrow. Don't ruin this for him." I replied, "I'm not leaving the hospital." He said, "Then you're dead to us." I blocked him. The next day, my son woke up, gripped my hand, and whispered, "Dad, Uncle was in my room while you were asleep." The surgical waiting room at St. Clement's had 17 chairs. I counted them twice between midnight and 4 in the morning because there was nothing else to do with my hands. Leon had been in the operating room for 3 hours by then. A ruptured spleen from a bike accident on Hillcrest Avenue, the street he rode every afternoon after school. The same 40 yards of pavement I had watched him navigate through the kitchen window 100 times while doing dishes. The surgeon came out at 8:32 p.m. and said the word stable, and I sat back down in chair number 9 and pressed both palms flat on my knees because if I did not hold something still, nothing would be. Before they took him into surgery, I had put his carved wooden bear on the bedside table. I made it for him from a piece of cedar when he was 5. Rough edges, palm-sized, a simple shape you could hold in one hand. He had kept it on his nightstand since the week I gave it to him, and I grabbed it on the way out of the house because I wanted him to see something from his own room when he came around, one familiar thing among all the fluorescent light and machinery. The nurse on intake let me leave it there. It sat next to the heart monitor, and that was the last thing I saw before the corridor doors closed. I am a plumber. I own a small company, 3 employees and 1 service truck, mostly residential work with some light commercial. Miles Plumbing. I pull around $72,000 a year, which is comfortable without being anything. I mention this now because my brother Blake used my job as an insult later, and I want you to know what it actually meant before you hear how he used it. My father Carl died of a heart attack 4 years before that night in chair 9. He was 61. Fast, which people kept telling me was a mercy, and maybe it was for him. For the rest of us, fast meant no transition, no handoff, no time to redistribute whatever had been held in place by his presence. My mother Ruth was 64, bad knees, lived alone in the house Blake and I grew up in, 40 minutes from my place. Blake was 40, worked sales at a car dealership, earned enough to maintain the appearance of someone who did not need help, which is different from actually being fine. His son Drew, 13, played travel basketball. Travel basketball costs money. Registration fees at the league level run over $1,000 a season. Equipment. Sneakers every year because Drew's feet kept growing. Jerseys when the team updated their kit. A new gear bag when the zipper on the old one broke. Tournament weekends with hotels 30 minutes from wherever the away game was. Gas, meals, entry fees. Somebody had to cover it. Blake never asked me for money directly. Because Blake had learned early that asking directly risked a direct answer, and a direct answer might be no. He operated a different way. A few days before a big expense came due, he would send something low-key. "Drew's got a game Saturday. Can you grab his gear bag from the sporting goods place on 5th? And I would go to the store. Then the registration invoice would be due, and I would pay it, because the season was starting, and someone had to, and the system had established that I was that person. Then Blake would send me a hotel confirmation link, and I would click through and pay it, because that is what you do when you have been doing it for so long that not doing it would take more energy than continuing. 3 years of that. Every dollar from my accounts. Blake's total contribution across all 3 seasons. Nothing. No partial payment, no reimbursement request, no acknowledgement that money was involved at all. Just the texts and the expectation, and me filling the gap he left every single time. I drove Ruth to her knee specialist every other Tuesday because Blake never offered, and the alternative was her taking a cab she would spend the next week complaining about. I kept driving her. I kept showing up for the Tuesday rides and the sports expenses and everything else, because Carl was gone and someone had to hold the shape of what was left, and Blake was not offering. At some point I told myself plainly, I stopped going to Blake's house 2 years ago. But Mom still needs the Tuesday rides. So I keep showing up to a family that has already decided I am the help. I should have stopped. I kept choosing not to. That was the arrangement the night Leon was in surgery on a ruptured spleen, and I was sitting in chair number 9 at St. Clement's. At 9:15 p.m., while Leon was still in the recovery room, and I had not eaten since the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Blake. Drive my son to his championship tomorrow. Don't ruin this for him. I set the phone down on my knee and read it again. Then I typed, I'm not leaving the hospital. His reply came in 40 seconds. Then you're dead to us. I looked at the text for a moment. Then I blocked him. Wendy texted me around 9:30 from my office. She had heard what happened through Leon's school's phone chain and wanted to know which hospital and whether I needed anything. I told her St. Clement's and no, I had everything I needed, but thank you. She replied, I'll be there in the morning. I told her she did not have to. She did not reply to that, which meant she was coming in the morning. Ruth called around 10:30. She did not open with Leon. She started with Blake, said he was under a lot of pressure, said Drew had been working toward this championship all season. Said my father always believed that family shows up when it counts. She said Leon was in good hands, that the doctors were paid to handle his situation, that Blake did not have anyone else he could call on short notice. I let her finish speaking. I said goodbye. I hung up. A nurse came by sometime after 11 and offered to bring a cot from the supply room. I said no. She left a thin hospital blanket on the chair beside mine without asking, and I sat with it folded across my knees until I eventually pulled Leon's bed close enough and leaned in with one hand near the rail. The cedar bear was on the bedside table, 3 inches from his fingers. I fell asleep the way you do in hospital chairs, not fully down, just holding position until morning, aware of every shift in the machines. If you have ever spent a night like that, watching your child breathe after surgery, cataloging every risk you ever let slide, and every helmet that stayed on the hook, then you already know what kind of rest that is. If this story is landing somewhere close to home, stay with Karma Unfolded. We tell the full story every week. Morning light came through the blinds in thin angled slats. Leon's hand found my wrist before I was fully awake, his fingers closing around it slowly. The deliberate grip of a kid who has been building up to something for a few minutes while you sleep. His eyes were open. His voice was thin from the breathing tube they had removed the night before, rough at the edges and careful with each word. Dad, he said, the bear is on the floor. I looked. The carved cedar bear was face down on the linoleum, a foot from the base of the bedside table. I picked it up and set it back. I sat down without saying anything for a moment, just looking at Leon, at the color coming back into his face, at the way he was watching me to measure how I was going to handle what he was about to say. What happened last night, I asked. His eyes moved toward the door and then came back. Uncle was in my room while you were asleep. He paused, working through the post-sedation fog. He went through your jacket, on the chair by the window. He took something and he left. He bumped the table when he walked past. I got up and checked my jacket folded on the chair. My truck keys were gone. The cash envelope in the interior pocket, $400 in 20s I had pulled from the ATM the morning of Leon's accident, before everything else started, was gone too. I told Leon I would be back. I walked to the parking lot. My truck had been in spot 42, second row near the concrete planter on the east side of the structure. The spot was empty. I stood there for a full minute and ran through the logic of it. I had not moved the truck since arriving with Leon in the ambulance the day before. I had not given anyone my keys. The keys were gone from my jacket, and the truck was gone from spot 42, and Leon had seen his uncle in the room at 1:47 in the morning. The math was simple, and the only question was what I was going to do about it. A hospital maintenance worker went past with a rolling supply cart, wheels squeaking on the concrete, not looking at me. I watched him go. I went back inside and stopped at the security desk in the lobby. I told the officer on duty that I had reason to believe someone had entered my son's room between midnight and 5 a.m. and removed property from my jacket while I was asleep beside the bed. I told him I was the patient's legal guardian, and I was formally requesting a review of the camera footage for that room during that window. He wrote my name and Leon's room number on a form and said someone from the security department would be in contact within 24 to 48 hours. I thanked him. I walked back to Leon's room. I sat down in the chair. There was a version of the next move that involved calling Blake right then, confronting him by phone, demanding an explanation. I considered it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I set it aside. A phone call would give him a chance to construct a story before anything was verified. I wanted the footage first. I wanted everything in hand before I said a word to anyone. Back in Leon's room, he was watching my face with the attention kids use when they are deciding whether the adult in the room is going to be all right. I sat down and picked up the cedar bear and turned it over once in my hand. The edges I had never smoothed all the way because Leon liked the texture. I set it back on the table. "Dad, are you okay?" "I'm right here," I said. I almost called Blake from that chair. His name was already in my contacts, my thumb already on the screen. But Leon's hand was still resting near mine on the rail, and he was watching my face, and the bear was back in its spot. So I put the phone in my pocket and asked him if he wanted the television on. Blake showed up the following morning, day 2, around 10. He walked into the corridor outside Leon's room holding my truck keys in one hand and the cash envelope in the other, and he wore the expression of someone who had rehearsed the conciliatory version of himself during the drive. "How's the little guy doing?" His voice was pitched to sound like an uncle checking in. "You came into his room at 1:47 in the morning," I said. His face shifted, not toward guilt, more toward something recalculating. "I was going to bring everything back, Miles. I did bring it back. Drew needed a ride, and your truck was right there. It was one morning. While my son was 3 feet away from you with staples in his abdomen," I said. Whatever composure he had rehearsed dropped out of his face. Wendy was coming up the corridor from the elevator at the far end, and a nurse was at the station 10 feet from where we stood, and Blake looked at both of them and apparently decided neither changed what he wanted to say. He said, "You fix toilets for a living, Miles. You crawl under people's houses so they can flush. And you think you get to sit here playing hero because your kid fell off a bicycle on the same street he rides every single day, and you never thought to tell him to slow down? My son had a championship game, a real thing, something that matters to someone's future. Your boy has a hospital bed because his father couldn't be bothered to watch him ride. Don't talk to me about priorities." Wendy had stopped walking. She stood about 12 feet back, having caught the last 2 sentences clearly. Blake set the keys in the envelope on the corner of the nurse's station counter and walked toward the elevator without looking back. The envelope was $60 short when I checked it later. Gas, probably, and something from the concession stand at the championship. I put it in my jacket without counting it in front of the nurse, who had her eyes on her computer screen with the practiced attention of someone who has heard too many of these corridor scenes to react to one more. Wendy came into Leon's room and sat with him for 40 minutes. She had stopped at the art supply store 2 blocks from the office on her way over and brought a medium-sized sketchbook and a set of 12 colored pencils in a tin case. She had also brought a granola bar, which she set on the tray table for Leon without comment, because she knew he had not eaten much since the day before, and hospital food at 11 years old is unconvincing. She did not say a single word about Blake. She pulled her chair close to the bed and asked Leon about the carved cedar bear on the bedside table. She asked what kind of bear it was, what bears like that preferred to eat, whether it had a name. Leon considered this seriously. He said it did not have a name, but it had clear opinions, specifically about salmon, based on a documentary about grizzly bears he had watched twice and found definitive on the matter. Wendy asked him to prove it by drawing the bear catching a fish. Leon took the sketchbook and started drawing. He drew for 30 minutes. The bear was round and had small, determined ears. The fish was too small at first, and Leon crossed it out and started over, because it was not realistic for a bear that size to bother with a fish that small. He made the fish substantially larger, added an expression to the fish that conveyed alarm, and showed the finished drawing to Wendy, who studied it for a moment and said it looked like the fish had it coming. Leon laughed for the first time since surgery, a real one, and the monitor next to him registered the change in his breathing. Wendy did not make a thing of it. She asked him what the bear's next meal would be and whether salmon was a year-round preference. That was Wendy. She came to the hospital when no one else did, and she made his first good moment about a bear's dietary philosophy instead of about anything that had happened in the previous 36 hours. I owe her more than she would ever let me say. That afternoon, hospital security emailed me the footage file. I watched it in the corridor outside the room. 1:47, I'm on the timestamp. Blake entering, crossing to the chair by the window, reaching into my jacket, pulling out the keys, then the envelope. Turning to leave, his shoulder catching the bedside table. The bear falling to the floor. Leon's hand moving once on the rail. Blake glancing at the bed for 1 second, not stopping, walking out. I watched the clip once, closed it, put my phone in my pocket. I almost showed it to the nurse right there in the hallway. The timestamp was visible, and Blake's face was clear in the room light. But I had worked enough jobs where a homeowner wanted to argue about the diagnosis before I finished looking to understand that the moment you show your evidence before the room is ready to receive it, you lose half of what it was worth. The footage was not going anywhere, and neither was I. Leon came home on day 5. The bear went back to his nightstand. Same spot it had always occupied, same slight angle it always settled into on the worn surface. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and 3 years of bank statements. Wendy came by after closing the office. She runs the books for Miles Plumbing, so she knows my account format the way I know pipe sizing, which meant she could move through the records faster than I could. We spread them across the table and went through every transaction connected to Drew's basketball. League registration, $1,200 per year, 3 seasons, paid directly by me to the league each time. Total, $3,600. Equipment, sneakers twice over 3 years. 2 jersey updates when the team changed their kit. A gear bag I bought because Drew's old one had a broken zipper. $4,200 across the full period. Tournament travel, hotels for away weekends, entry fees, gas money, all sent via Venmo to Blake's account with for Drew in the note every single time. $6,300. Gross total, $14,100. I had been saying $14,000 in my head for months. The actual figure was $100 more. Blake's column across all 3 years, nothing. Not one payment to the league, not one equipment receipt, not one Venmo to me for any portion of any cost. Then my phone buzzed. Jolene, Blake's wife. She texted me directly, which was unusual, not the kind of thing she did without Blake's involvement. She wrote, "Blake feels terrible about everything. Can you two just talk? He has been under so much stress. Drew's season is expensive, and Blake handles all of it." I read it aloud to Wendy. She set the laptop down and looked at me. He told her he pays for it. We sat with that for a moment, looking at the blank column on the bank statement where Blake's name appeared with nothing next to it across 3 consecutive years. Wendy is good at numbers in the way that comes from years of making small business books balance, which means she sees patterns that do not announce themselves. She walked through it out loud. If Jolene believed Blake was handling Drew's sports, she had a budget line for it in their household finances, probably something like $400 a month when you averaged registration, gear, and travel over the full year. That $400 had to be going somewhere visible in their accounts, because Jolene believed it was going to Drew's basketball program. She thought money was leaving their account for that purpose. She budgeted for it. She tracked it, or at least noted it. But Blake had never paid the league, the equipment stores, or any hotel. Every actual payment for Drew's sports was mine, traced to my accounts, my cards, my Venmo. So the $400 a month Jolene thought was going to Drew's season was going somewhere else entirely. Blake's car payment was $380 a month, reliable and on time for 3 years running. The numbers did not require much interpretation. Blake had been collecting his wife's sports budget while I covered the real costs, keeping the gap, and the arrangement worked as long as nobody compared notes. He was not freeloading. He was running a domestic fraud. I was the mechanism that made it invisible, and it had run for 3 uninterrupted seasons because I never stopped to look at what I was actually subsidizing. Wendy closed the laptop and looked at me across the table. What do you want to do with this? I told her I wanted to do it once, in a room where everyone could hear it at the same time, and I wanted everything documented before the room assembled. I filed the police report the next morning at the district station. I walked in, told them what I needed, and waited for the on-duty officer. When he came, I explained. My son had been in post-surgical recovery in a hospital bed. I was asleep in the chair beside him, and my brother had entered the room at 1:47 a.m. and taken my vehicle keys and $400 in cash from my jacket. I showed him the security footage on my phone. He reviewed it, took my statement, wrote the report. He explained what I already expected. In family situations where the vehicle came back undamaged, criminal prosecution was unlikely to proceed. I told him I understood. I gave him the footage file and asked him to attach it to the report. He did. The report number went into my phone contacts under Blake's name, beneath the number I had already blocked. I drove home from the station. I sat in the driveway in my truck for a few minutes, the engine off, looking at the front of the house, the porch light I had left on, the front window with the blinds drawn, the same house I had brought Leon home to from the hospital when he was born 11 years ago. Then I went inside and checked on him. He was asleep, the bear on the nightstand exactly where I had put it. The sketchbook Wendy had given him open on the bed beside him to the page with the fish that had it coming. That same week I sent Ruth a text. I would not be available for the Tuesday appointments going forward, and she should make other arrangements. She replied at length, a long message that must have taken several attempts to get right, covering Blake's stress and Drew's season and what the family needed right now. I read the full message. I put the phone down. There was nothing in it that required a response from me. I almost responded anyway, the night after Leon fell asleep and the house was quiet. I had the text thread open, the cursor blinking in the reply box. 20 years of reflex wanted me to type something softening, some version of let's see how things settle, some hedge that kept the door partly open. Then I looked at the bank statement still on the kitchen table, Blake's blank column across 3 years, and I closed the message without typing a single letter. The room was almost ready. Ruth scheduled what she called a family meeting for the following Saturday. She called Blake and me separately. She told each of us it would be good to sit down together, that these things needed to be aired, that she thought it would help. Blake drove over thinking Miles had cooled off, that the heat had passed the way it always eventually passed, because I was always the one who let it. He sat on Ruth's couch with his arms loose, and his body language calibrated to something between apologetic and casual. Jolene sat beside him, because Ruth had called her too and said it was important that everyone be there. I arrived with my phone, a printed copy of 3 years of bank statements, and the carved cedar bear in my jacket pocket. Wendy waited in her car in the driveway. I had told her to stay there unless I sent a text. Ruth's living room. Same carpet since 1998, worn at the path between the doorway and the armchair. Same green lamp on the side table she had bought at a yard sale the year Blake and I were in middle school and never replaced, because she did not see the point in replacing things that still worked. Same framed photograph of my father on the mantel, taken the year before he died, looking at the room the way he always did in photographs, like he was composing a polite excuse to be somewhere else. He had never been comfortable being photographed. I had always thought that was something we had in common. Blake on the couch. Jolene beside him with her hands in her lap and the posture of someone who does not yet know exactly how bad this is going to be, but can feel the shape of it from the room temperature. Ruth in her armchair, hands folded, watching me. None of them had touched the coffee cups Ruth had set out on the table before I arrived. The cups were still full and going cold. Before I tell you what happened in that room, if you have stayed with this story this far, subscribe to Karma Unfolded. Every week, the full story. I sat down across from them. I did not speak for the first 90 seconds. I took out my phone and connected it to Ruth's television using the Chromecast I had set up for her 2 Christmases ago. When she mentioned she wanted to watch streaming shows and did not know how. She had asked at the time why she needed it. I told her it was simple once you learned it. She had used it every night since for her crime dramas. I opened the security footage file. I cast it to the screen. I let it play. The room went quiet in a way that had nothing to do with politeness. Not the held breath quiet before someone begins a sentence. Something quieter than that, and heavier. The quiet of people who do not know what they are about to see, and then begin to. 1:47 I'm on the timestamp. Blake entering the room, crossing to the chair, reaching into my jacket, his shoulder catching the bedside table. The bear falling, Leon's hand moving once on the rail. Blake glancing at the bed, not stopping, walking out. Ruth's hand went to her mouth before the clip ended. Jolene's eyes did not leave the screen when the footage finished and the television returned to its home menu. Blake said, "I was going to bring it back." I set the printed bank statement on the coffee table. 3 years of transactions, highlighted by category. League payments in yellow, 0 from Blake. Equipment in blue, 0 from Blake. Venmo transfers for tournament travel in green, all outgoing from my account, all tagged for Drew. His contribution line blank for every season. Jolene picked up the paper. She read it slowly, moving down the columns, and she set it back on the table with a steadiness that took some effort to maintain. She looked at her husband. "You told me you paid for this." Blake opened his mouth. Nothing came out that would have helped him. I texted Wendy one word. She came through the front door, which Ruth had left unlocked, and took the chair near the hallway entrance. She did not say anything. She was there as a witness. Everyone in the room understood that. "You texted me," I said, "to leave my son's surgery and drive your son to his game. When I said no, you told me I was dead to you. Then you drove to that hospital in the middle of the night and went through my jacket at 1:47 in the morning while my son was 3 feet away from you, fresh out of the operating room, and took my truck keys and $400 in cash. You drove my truck to a championship I paid for. Every registration fee for 3 seasons. Every piece of gear. Every hotel room and tank of gas for every away tournament. $14,100 total. Blake, all from my accounts. Your column blank across every line on that statement. And you told Jolene you handled it. You let her set aside money every month for Drew's sports while you pocketed the difference, because you knew I would cover the real costs without asking questions. That is theft from your wife, Blake. That is what that was. And the $400 from my jacket in a hospital room is a police matter, which is why it is on file." I turned to face Ruth directly. "You called me the afternoon Leon was in surgery. You did not ask how he was. Not in the first sentence, not in the second. You asked me to drive Drew to his game. You said the doctors were paid to handle Leon. You used my father's name to guilt me into leaving my son's hospital room. I have driven you to 52 appointments over 4 years. Copays, pharmacy pickups, the $4,300 in out-of-pocket costs that Blake never once offered to split. Not once. I kept driving you because you were alone and Carl was gone and somebody had to. That somebody was me. It was always me." Ruth's hands moved in her lap. She looked down at them. "Back to Blake, I filed the police report Tuesday. Unauthorized use of a vehicle and theft of $400 cash. Both on record, both with the footage attached. I am not asking you to respond to that. I am telling you it exists." Ruth opened her mouth. "I am done paying for Drew's season," I said. "I am done driving Mom to her appointments. I have been the one person in this family who kept showing up so none of you ever had to decide whether you wanted to. That ends now. This is the last time I sit in this room." Blake's jaw locked. His right hand opened and closed twice at his side, the fingers spreading and pressing in a slow rhythm he was not controlling. He leaned back in his seat, then shifted forward, then went still when he understood that neither position gave him anything. His eyes moved to Jolene's face for a fraction of a second and found no rescue there. She was still looking at the bank statement on the coffee table. He swallowed audibly, his throat working once, and his mouth came open and held that way for 4 full seconds before anything came out. When it did, It had less force than anything else he had said in that room. You crawl under people's houses. That's what you are. And you think that gives you standing to sit here and talk to me like this? I crawl under people's houses, I said. So my son has a roof over his. I took that money, every dollar of it, and paid for 3 seasons of your son's basketball while you told your wife you handled it yourself. You want to talk about crawling, Blake? I have been carrying this family for 4 years. You couldn't carry your own car keys without stealing mine. He tried one more thing. He shifted in his seat, something in his posture reaching backward. His voice dropping to a register that was trying to find something still reachable between us. When Dad died, he said, I sat with you in the hospital waiting room for 9 hours. I held your coffee. I didn't leave. You know that. You know that's what brothers do. I reached across the coffee table. I picked up the carved cedar bear. I put it in my jacket pocket. I stood up. You said I was dead to you, I said. Then you stole from my son's hospital room. Dead men don't owe you anything, Blake. I walked to the front door. I opened it. I stepped through it. I closed it behind me. Not a slam, nothing theatrical, just the quiet click of the latch, finding the strike plate, the sound a door makes when something is finished and will not be reopened. 2 weeks after Ruth's living room, Blake wrote a $450 check to the basketball league for Drew's next season registration. He wrote it the way he had always operated, on the assumption that the arrangement would hold, that Miles would cover the real costs, that the machinery running for 3 seasons would run a 4th. The league processed the check. It bounced. Their accounts manager called Blake on a Tuesday afternoon and told him the check had come back and Drew's roster spot was suspended until payment cleared. She was not unkind about it, just matter of fact, the tone of someone who has made this kind of call before and knows that the person on the other end does not have a good answer. Blake sat in the dealership parking lot during his lunch break and called my number. 1 ring, then voicemail. He hung up without leaving a message. He sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes. Wendy happened to drive past on her way to a parts supplier and recognized his car parked in the row near the street, the engine running, nobody going anywhere. She mentioned it to me that evening. Blake never called the league back that afternoon. The roster spot stayed suspended. Drew did not play that week. Jolene had been at her mother's house since the Saturday of the meeting. 11 days in, she texted Blake one sentence. Show me the receipts for Drew's last 3 seasons. Blake opened his banking app on his phone and scrolled back through 3 years of transactions looking for something he could forward to her. Every payment for league registration, equipment, and tournament travel traced to one source, Miles. Blake's account showed the sports budget going out each month. It did not show it arriving anywhere it was supposed to go. He closed the app. He did not text Jolene back. He sat in the kitchen of the house they shared, at the table where they usually ate dinner together, and looked at the sliding door to the backyard for a while. And that silence was the answer Jolene already had. The drive home from Ruth's house that Saturday afternoon was Blake and Drew in the car. 22 minutes of mostly nothing. Drew had sat in the back seat during the meeting, in the hallway actually, on the bench seat near the front door where Ruth put her keys. Far enough from the living room to not hear everything, but close enough to hear some of it. On the drive home, neither of them spoke for the first 8 minutes. Then Drew turned toward his father and said, Dad, did Uncle Miles really pay for all my games? Blake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He did not answer. Drew looked out the window at the passing streetlights. Blake reached over and turned on the radio. Drew reached over and turned it off. They drove the last 14 minutes in complete silence, and that silence was probably the thing Blake came back to alone on the couch later. Because Jolene had returned to the house and taken the bedroom and locked the door, and the couch was what was left, and the question Drew had asked in the car was still sitting in the air without an answer. Ruth left me a voicemail 3 weeks after the meeting. Something about how brothers find their way through things when they give it time. How my father would have wanted us to work towards something better than this. I heard the first sentence and set the phone down. The notification sat on my screen for 3 weeks after that, unplayed. The way certain things sit when they are present, but no longer have any claim on you. 6 weeks after the Saturday at Ruth's house, Leon's baseball season started. Blake was sleeping on his couch because Jolene had the bedroom. Drew had not played basketball since the roster suspension. The $450 check was still unpaid. The league had sent one follow-up notice, and then nothing, which meant the spot was gone, and the season was effectively over for Drew before it started. Across town at the dealership, Blake was selling cars to people he smiled at. And whatever he was thinking about on the drive home each night, he was not sharing it with anyone who mentioned it to me. I signed Leon up for baseball the Tuesday after he came home from the hospital, while he was asleep in the afternoon. I paid the $85 registration online and added him to the practice schedule. He did not know about it until I mentioned it at dinner that evening. Almost in passing, something casual. He looked at me for a second to confirm I was serious, and when I confirmed it, he went back to his food and said cool in the voice kids use when something matters to them and they do not want to make it a scene. I knew what that voice meant. I stood in his doorway that night for a moment before turning in. The cedar bear was on the nightstand, same spot it had always sat, same slight angle it always settled into on the worn wood surface. His baseball glove was on the floor next to the bed, already broken in from the afternoons he had spent working it with a ball and a rubber band before the season officially started, already carrying the smell of leather and grass and something that was just his room. Leon was asleep on his side with one arm folded under his pillow. I walked to the kitchen. Ruth's voicemail notification was on my phone, 21 days old. The badge was still on the screen. I looked at it for a second, then set the phone face down on the counter. I opened the back door and stepped outside. Warm air. Still enough to hear the neighborhood. A dog somewhere on the next block, a car turning off the main road, the low sound of someone's air conditioning unit kicking on. I sat down on the back step and held my coffee in both hands. Blake had a couch and an unanswered text from Jolene and a son who had stopped talking in the car. Ruth had a voicemail on a phone I was not going to pick up. The $450 check was returned. The cedar bear was on the nightstand in the bedroom. The voicemail was on the counter inside. The kitchen was quiet behind me, the way a house gets quiet when the person you built it around is safe and asleep and does not need anything from you at this exact moment. I drank my coffee. The sky was still faintly lit along the western edge. I did not check my phone. If this story stayed with you until the end, subscribe to Karma Unfolded and hit the notification bell. Every week, the full story, from the first text to the last silence.